Welcome everybody to Isaka Squared Table of 30th November 22. Please mute your microphone and turn off your camera. I will wait for 1 minute more till everybody is in. Good evening, everybody. We will start with our Isaka Squared Table of November 30th, 22, with the title, I know all your weak cryptographic keys. Scary, isn't it? And I have to look. Some housekeeping before we start. Please mute your microphone, but I think that managed everybody, and stop sharing your video. Make sure you appear on Teams with the same first and last name for registration in order to acquire your CP points. The presentation will be recorded along with the slides. It might be released by mail after the session. And for questions, use raise hand, or even better, type it in the chat box. Afterwards, there will be a moment for making questions. So I will collect them all and Johan will answer them then afterwards, after the presentation. And this is our speaker today, Johan Loos, and he's a security researcher, but he will introduce himself much more. So without much more ado, I will transfer my presentation to Johan. Johan, welcome. Thank you for
Thank you for the introduction.
You can share your screen soon.
Yes. Okay, before we start, thanks Isaka for accepting my presentation, and thank all the participants for being here with me about a presentation on the RSA. Cryptography. The purpose of this presentation is basically to give you an idea how that a private key can be recovered from a public key. But before we start, maybe a little introduction about myself. I'm working as a freelance security specialist and privacy professional. So in several areas of security, can be IT security, information security, medical devices, privacy, and cryptography. And yeah, I'm a security professional, so I evangelize security to organizations so that they take care about security in the way how it needs to be done by implementing the security and privacy by design principles. I'm from Belgium, so at the bottom of the slide, this is my email address. If you have some questions after the presentation or something is not clear, you can always send me an email. And afterwards, we have some questions if you want to address them quickly. First, a little message, which is in line with the presentation. So security is more than buying a certificate only. Why this message? Yeah, so the organizations and some security regulations and other standards, they request that security needs to be implemented, but encryption needs to be implemented as well. So what we now see these days is that more and more companies, they will buy a certificate from a public certification authority, and they install that certificate on a network device, an infrastructure component, or a web server, and that's it. So the purpose of this presentation is to give you more information about what is actually in the certificate and are there some vulnerabilities in the certificate itself. Now, before we start with the presentation, or let's say with the demonstration, I give you some background information on mathematics. So how is the presentation built? So first we have a short introduction into some mathematics, because this is the basic to understand the RSA algorithm. Then I will explain you how that the RSA algorithm works. Then the next is to give you some more information about how that the communication is set securely, and to dive more into the transport layer security protocol. Then I give you a demonstration on the entire presentation, but then using my virtual machines. And the last part is that a conclusion where I give some things to think about that you can use in your daily life at work. So first, as I said in the beginning, yes, first some mathematics. So first we have here the integer. What is an integer? That's a collection of positive numbers, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. So that's just a whole bunch of numbers. A factor is a factor means when you have a product of two numbers, let's say you have 6, which is a product of 2 multiplied with 3, then 2 is a factor and 3 is also a factor. A prime number is an integer. An integer is prime when it can only be divided by 1 and itself. So meaning that 2 is a prime number, 3, 5, and 7 are prime numbers. 4 not, because 4 can be divided by 2, and 8 is not a prime number because 8 can be divided by 4 and 2. So there are a whole set of prime numbers. These are just the small ones, but for the RSA algorithm, we will use very large prime numbers. Another definition here is modulo. Modulo is the remainder of an entire division, meaning when you have a number 10 and you divide it by 4, then it's 2. And then because 2 multiplied with 4 is 8, and then 10 minus 8 is 2. So 2 is then the remainder of the entire division. And this is notified here by the formula A equal to B mod N. Another definition that we use in the RSA algorithm is a coprime. Coprime is the number that has no factors in common with another number other than 1. So an example here, the number 14 and 15 are coprimes. This means that there are no common factors between these two numbers. So the factors of 14 are 1, 2, 7, and 14. And the factor for 15 are 1, 3, 5, and 15. So as you can see, there are no common factors except 1. And meaning that 14 and 15 are coprimes, because we use the definition of coprime later in the RSA algorithm as well. Another is the Euler-Stotiant. The Euler-Stotiant is the total amount of integers less than or equal to n that are coprime to n. So meaning here the Euler-Stotiant of 9 is equal to 6, and then between brackets you can see all the numbers that are coprime to 9. Factorization is the process of decomposing an integer into its prime factors, and that is a technique that we will use at the end of the presentation to factorize a modulus into its prime factors. So factorization just means that if you have a number, let's say 6, and you want to factorize it, then the factors are 2 and 3. So that's actually the opposite of the taking the product of 2 factors. The greatest common divisor of the means the larger integer that divides each of the integers. So here we have the GCD of 60 and 48 is equal to 12. So meaning that 12 is the largest integer for these 2 numbers. Why this is used for, that will be explained at the end of the presentation. So first, what is RSA? The RSA algorithm exists a long time ago, from 1977, and it's founded by 3 people, Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman, and it's basically asymmetric encryption. So asymmetric encryption means that you have 2 keys. We have a public key and we have a private key. The private key is normally stored in a secure location on a system. It can be a web server, a network component, or mobile phone, or whatever. And the public key can be made public. And the public key is what we found, or what we find in the certificate. But more about certificates within a couple of minutes. Now, when you generate a key pair, meaning you generate a public and a private key, each security identity will have its own key pair. So if you have a web server where the public and private key is generated, it will be stored on that server. And if you have another web server on the internet, maybe, then this server will have its own public and private key pair. Each public and private key, they have a mathematical relationship with each other. So meaning, if you protect something with a key, with a public key, then only the corresponding private key can decrypt it. So it's not possible that you can use the private key from another system to decrypt your information. That's not possible. So it's a couple, the public and the private key. Now, it's important that the keys used to protect information, that they are based on large prime numbers. We come back on this, what is large, within a few slides, where we go deeper about the key generation process. This is just an introduction. Now, these prime numbers, they're supposed to be randomly generated. So the question is, what is random? In computer terms, it is not possible to generate random numbers. It's actually pseudo-random. So software or other components, they use pseudo-random number generators to generate a number that you can use within an application or to protect information. This information during the key generation process will be stored in a PEM file. And a PEM file is a base64 translation of a X509 file, which is basically a certificate. Now, I will show this to you within a few moments, but a PEM file, it contains all your cryptographic key material, meaning it contains the public key, the private key, and other information as well. Now, the key generation process. So how the RSA algorithm works. So first, a system, it can be a computer, a network device, or whatever systems that you have where RSA is enabled, it needs to generate 2 large prime numbers. These prime numbers, that can be of any size. It can be 512, 1024, 2048 bits or more. So for the RSA algorithm, we generate 2 prime numbers. For example, a prime number of 1024 bits and we call them P, and the other prime number is Q. Now we have our two prime numbers. The RSA algorithm will calculate the product of these two prime numbers. So meaning when you multiply P and Q, then you have a new number, and this is called the modulus, and this is n. So n is a product of the two prime numbers. Now this is what you can see in your certificates, which I will show you again within a few slides. But most of the times when you have a certificate or when you buy a certificate from a certification authority, the modulus is more or less 2048 bits, meaning that we have two prime numbers of 1024 bits each. The next step is to calculate the Euler-Stotians. That's the formula here. It's again a product of the two prime numbers, but then the previous prime number in the list. Remember, this gives me the amount of prime numbers which are co-prime to my modulus, n. The next step is to generate another prime number, e, which is the public or encryption component. And we have to be sure that e is larger than 1, but less than the totient value. The typical value used today as the encryption component is 65,537. And on the right side of the slide, you can see more details about the certificate from Isaka.nl. So here you can see that at the bottom of the slide, the algorithm used for the keys is RSA. We have a key size of 2048. This is my modulus, meaning that each prime number will have a bit size of 1024 bits. The exponent is the value which was on the left side. This is my E, and this is my encryption component. And the modulus starting with 88 double D is my product of the two prime numbers, which is currently, of course, unknown because the prime number needs to be protected or destroyed after the calculating the modulus. Now, why is this value important? Because if you want to encrypt something, you need the public exponent, and the public exponent is E. So here in this formula, you can see that the cipher is equal to the message to the power E modulus n. Remember, n is the mod n. N is the modulus, the product of our two prime numbers. And E is the public value, that's this value. So if this value is too small, then the message is not well protected because, yeah, to the power, let's say, if the value E is 2, then it's just, yeah, not protected enough and can easily be decoded or deciphered. Besides the public exponent, we need also a private component, and the private component is the decryption value. So D, which is equal to the inverse of E, and E is a value that we have here, mod the Euler-Stotian value. This will be a number from a very large size. Now, it is important that if you decrypt information, that if we want to decrypt information, which is our clear text message M, is equal to the encrypted information, the one that we calculated here, to the power D, and D is then our decryption exponent, mod N, which is the modulus here, what we can find in the certificate. So this also the value of D is also important, because if D is a very large number in size, it means that the decryption of information will take more resources than encryption. So sometimes organization will ask, what is now a appropriate value for my key size? So here we have a key size of 2048 bits, meaning each prime number is 1024 bits, and we have an exponent of 65,000 and so on. So if E is a number which is very large in size, this means that my encryption will take much more time, and you will ask much more resources from your system. So you have to find a balance between the hardware resources that you have and choosing a correct value for the public exponent. At the end, we have, after the key generation process, we have two numbers. We have a public key, which is a combination of the modulus and the public exponent. And then we have a private key, which is a combination of the modulus and the private component. And then we can continue to protect our information. Now, our systems, they cannot use these keys directly, because even they are stored in memory or they are written somewhere, hopefully not on the file system. So what we need to do is we need to embed the public key into a file so that other systems can use this key. Now, that's the reason why we have now a certificate. So what is a certificate? A certificate is a digital representation of the security identity, and meaning that the certificate, it contains the public key of your system, which is my security identity. It can be a user, it can be a server or a network component, it doesn't matter here. And the certification authority will digitally sign our certificate. It is also possible to create self-signed certificates. This is not recommended, but that's also a solution. Now, the certification authorities, it can be an internal one, like the Windows Active Directory certificate services, or you can buy a certificate from an external provider, like GlobalSign, SSL, RapidSSL, Taute, or whatever certification authority that you prefer on the internet. Now, before you receive a certificate, you need to generate a certificate signing request, meaning that you have your key material and you add extra information to it, like the subject name, maybe some contact information. All that information is prepared into a certificate signing request, and that file can be used to generate your certificate. For the people that requested a certificate before, what you basically do is you open that file, the CSR, you copy the content, you paste the content onto a web page, and then after a few seconds, you have your certificate ready, meaning that the contents of the certificate signing request will be embedded into the certificate itself, and then afterwards it will be digitally signed by the certification authority. When that step is done, your public key will be embedded in a certificate, and then you have a .cer file. And a cer file is a file which contains the public key. Now, sometimes you need to install a certificate on a server or maybe a firewall, whatever network device that you have, and you need the private key as well. If the private key is also available in a certificate file, then the extension will be PFX or P12. Now, Now we have a certificate. We can install the certificate on a website. Here on the right side, I requested a certificate for my domain. It's whitehatsecurity.be, which contains a public key of RSA 2048 bits, and it comes from the issuer SSL.com. It's a certificate that I can use for free for 3 months. But I will give you later on what are the problems with the certificate. So you cannot see it here if there are problems with the certificate, but I will explain it to within a moment. Now, how does the process works when you have a certificate on your website, on your web server, and the client wants to initiate a secure connection? The client or your web browser connects to the web server. The certificate of the web server is downloaded to the client, its web browser. And what the web browser will do is first it checks the validity of the certificate. Means that it will check the current date and the date here in the valid to and from fields. If the certificate or is the current date after the date from the certificate, then the certificate is expired. It can still be used, but you will get a warning message that it's expired. If the validity is okay, the next step that your client will initiate is to see if the certificate is revoked. And revocation means that the certificate is not valid anymore, and it will check the CRL, the certificate revocation list, or the online status protocol services. Then my client will generate a symmetric key, which is also known as a session key. That session key is used between the client and the web server to protect my information that I will send to the web server. Now, because it is symmetric encryption and the key is generated on the client side, the server needs to have the certificate, the symmetric key as well. The client will do this by encrypting the symmetric key or session key with the public key of the web server and will send it to the web server. The web server will use its corresponding private key to decrypt that field, and then the web server will also have the symmetric key. And now they can start encrypting information and decrypting on the client side. Now, before they agree on the symmetric algorithm that they will use, in the TLS session, the client will send some information about the algorithms that the client supports. More on that in the next slide. And then finally, the secure channel is generated or created between the client and the web server by using TLS, known as transport layer security. This is a high-level overview on how TLS 1.2 works. My demonstration will also use TLS 1.2. So what will happen here on the client side, the client will send a client hello message to the server. And in that client hello message, there is a list of all supported cipher suites that the client support. It depends actually on the operating system. If you are using older Windows operating system, then only older cipher suites are supported. But if you are using the latest version of Windows, then you have, of course, the latest next generation cipher suites used. Then the server will take a look at these cipher suites, and based on some choice that the server will make, he will choose one of these cryptographic cipher suites from the list. And then they both agree to use that specific cipher suite. And then there are some exchanges as well. And finally, they agree on which symmetric crypto algorithm that they will use, and then encryption can start. Now we go a little bit deeper into these packages. So this is a capture from my client to my web server. So as you can see here, under cipher switches, this capture comes from Wireshark. My client will send a list of cipher switches to the server. It starts with the most secure one and it will end with the less secure one. And then the server will pick up one cipher suite. And as you can see here in the server hello packet, the server will choose an algorithm which is here then the most secure from the list that the client supports. And this is TLS, RSA, and so on. So the client and the server, they both agree to use this specific cipher suite. What does this mean? This means that we are using TLS, meaning transport layer security. The second parameter actually is RSA, and means that RSA is used for both key exchange and authentication. Then together they are using AES encryption with 256 bits, and the mode that they use is the Galois counter mode. You have other modes as well. As you can see here in the cipher suite, we have GCM, but we have also CBC, and CBC stands for cipher block chaining. So GCM are the most recent methods of using encryption, because Randall or AES encryption is a block cipher, and GCM is one of the methods to protect this information. And then at the end here, we have the SHA-384, which is my hashing algorithm. Okay, so far so good. Now, this presentation comes from a study that I did, I think, almost 2 years ago. I did some study on cryptography, especially for the RSA, and I started reading some academic papers from people that did some academic problems with the RSA algorithm, and these documents are based on the mathematics. No, so what I did is I went through these papers and I translated all these findings into programmable code. So what I did is I wrote a program in Python which has the possibility to demonstrate all these vulnerabilities, but also to recover the private key if a vulnerability was detected. These scripts are not yet publicly available. Plan is to have these publicly available next year, somewhere I think in the beginning, because I'm currently writing a manual how to use that tool with screenshots and the whole explanation how it works. So one of the vulnerabilities here is close primes. This means that the prime numbers P and Q generated by the RSA algorithm, they are close to each other. And remember, we said in the beginning that the RSA algorithm, you use two prime numbers, but there was no definition how that the prime numbers look like. So if the prime numbers are too close to each other, we have a problem. Another problem that we can have here in the second one is common factor. And this means that when we have two certificates on the internet, and these certificates, they will have two prime numbers, of course, but one of the two prime numbers is the same over the two certificates. So meaning that they share a common prime number. And on more certificates that you have on the internet, I think that the chance that the prime number will be common in another certificate will be very high. But more on this before the conclusion. There are other vulnerabilities as well, but this is maybe for another presentation. We focus on the first one, and this is closed primes. So what is the vulnerability? So the vulnerability relies that the prime numbers P and Q are very close to each other. And this can be by using a faulty pseudo-random number generator or a random generator that contains bugs or whatever reason that they have. But basically, the prime numbers are not good enough. The size of the prime numbers can be a size of 512 bits or 2024 bits, or maybe higher. It's also a possibility. But for factorization, when you factor a modulus of 2048 bits, it can take some time when the numbers are very high. So close prime numbers means that the prime numbers are almost equal in size. For example, if you ask on a person, can you give me two numbers? And the person will say, okay, I give you one between 1 and 100. The person will say, okay, I give you 1 and I give you 99. So these are numbers that are not close to each other. But if you ask on another person, give me two numbers, and he say 48 and 49, then they are almost equal to each other. So this means that the modulus can be now calculated by using one factor multiplied with itself. Meaning, if we can find one of these numbers, we can calculate easily the other number as well. This is the formula, how to do it. So what I did, I translated this into a Python code, and the technique that we will use is Fermat factorization. If you look on the internet, you can find a lot of papers how Fermat factorization works. This is a screenshot of my tool. So by using my tool, I can generate faulty key material because otherwise I was not able to demonstrate it. And then here I can use the recover features to recover my private key. Now it's demo time. Time to give you a demonstration. So I think we will go a little bit over time if I see to the time now, but that's not a problem. So the tools that I use now is Python 3, my Python script. I use also Yafu. Yafu is a tool that you can use for Fermat factorization. And I use OpenSSL to retrieve some information. Okay. So let's go to my virtual environment. Everything is now live, so there can be something goes wrong, but normally not. But so what I did before we can start with the recovery of the private key, first you need faulty key material, and I used my tool for that to generate faulty key material. So how can we do that? Let's say this is my script. I use parameters generate and then close primes, meaning that I want to generate two prime numbers which are close to each other. The size of my prime numbers are 1024 bits, and I will write my file into the output into a file, and let's call it johan.pem. So now I have a file, johan.pem, which contains my key material. To give you more, to show you more details, what is now in my PEM file. Remember, the PEM file was a base64 encoded message. So I now use this command to show you the content of my PEM file. So what we can see here is that the file contains the modulus, it contains my public exponent, it contains my private exponent. This was D, as you remember in the slides. This is my prime number 1, and this is my second prime number. As you can see, normal, when everything goes fine, these prime numbers are different in size. In this case, the prime numbers are almost equal in size because the last two numbers are different and the rest is the same. Then we have some exponents and other information. And then finally here we have the private key. The next step is based on this information. You can create a certificate signing request, and then you can send it to, you can use the certificate signing request to ask or to buy a certificate from a certification authority on the internet. And then finally, when you receive the certificate, you can install it on your web server. And this is what I have here. I have a second machine, which is my web server. That web server is running IIS, Internet Information Services. As you can see here under certs, this is my certificate in my certificate store. When I double click on it, here you can see that it can be used to prove the identity to my to a remote computer, which is valid for my domain whitehatsecurity.be. I have the corresponding private key, and in details, we see here that we use a public key of RSA 2048 bits, and the certificate is especially for my website, whitehatsecurity.be. And it's a valid certificate. This one was digitally signed by a certification authority on the internet. I have no errors. Everything looks fine. Okay. Certificate is on the web server. It's bound to my website. This is what I can show you here. I have a web server running with a website. Under bindings, here we can see that the certificate is bound to my website on port 443, and it's listening for secure traffic. Okay, so far so good. Now, remember our goal was to recover a private key from a public key. Now, how do we do that? I go back to my client side, and what I need first, before I can start decrypting something, I need the certificate from a web server. The certificate, how can I retrieve it? You can open a web browser and then you can download the certificate manually, or you can use OpenSSL. In this case, I will show you how that you can do it via OpenSSL. So what I am doing here, first I will use OpenSSL to connect to my web server, which is listening on port 443, and then I will take my certificate and I will write it into a certificate file in a PEM format. Yeah, I get an error message because the certificate cannot be verified because there is no internet connection. But if I type dir, you can see that the certificate is here available. Now, what is in the certificate? We can also use OpenSSL for this. So OpenSSL X509, because it's a certificate. Remember, the certificates, they use the standard X509 version 3. So And then here, this is my certificate from my web server. Remember, this is the base 64 encoded information. To decode it, you can simply add text at the end, and now it's all written in clear text. So here we have the information about the certificate itself, the serial number, the modulus, the key length of the public key, the domain, the issuer, some other information like hashing, digital signatures, and at the end we have the public key. And you know that in the certificate it contains the public key, not the private key. The next step is to display the modulus. You can type modulus at the end, and then now you see only the modulus and not the other information as before. Now, before we can start decrypting information, first I need encrypted information. How do I do this? So what I do first, I start Wireshark. I start my sniffer, and now I connect using my web browser. On my web server, there is a login form, and the login form, it will ask for a username and a password. So what I do is I type in my username and my password. As you can see here, we have a padlock, meaning that my web traffic is encrypted with TLS between my web server and my web client. So I click on login. The client will set up a connection with the web server. And as you can see here, we have now a lot of traffic. Now, first, let's create a filter. This filter will show me only the encrypted information between the client and the server. And as you can see here, when I double click here on the server hello package, normally we should receive information about the algorithm that was the crypto suite that was selected, and it's the same as in my presentation. So what you can see here. So here we see that for the protocol used, it's TLS 1.2, and everything is secured and encrypted. Okay, let's now try to decrypt this. How do we do that? We know that the public key, that the certificate was vulnerable because we had a modulus which contains two prime numbers which are close to each other. No, normally you don't know this up front, but I will explain later on how that you can check it. So what we first need is we need the private key of the web server before we can read the contents of this encrypted information. How do we do that? So as explained in the presentation, we can use factorization. And factorization is basically composing my modulus into its prime factors. So how do we do this? What I need, so I need the modulus of my certificate, and I use Yahoo. It's a factorization tool. Oops. Factor 0x, because it's an hexadecimal number that I specify here. This will just take a couple of minutes, seconds, and then we can continue. So let's wait. Yeah. So here you can see now that the tool will decompose my modulus into its prime factors. These are now decimal numbers. As you can see, the numbers here are almost equal in size, except the last two digits. These are my prime numbers. This is my P and this is my Q. So now when I have the two prime numbers, I can calculate my private exponent, and I can use my private exponent to calculate my private key. So let's do that. So I use my tool. Recover. And I'm using close primes. The first prime number is P. The second prime number is the other number. And then the output will be written into a file. Let's call it the name of my web server, and yet at the end, recover, because it's the private key which is recovered. Oops, I've typed something wrong. Yes, I see what it is. Hang on. I start over. It's just a copy-paste error. Here is the modulus, which is in SP. That is, of course, not correct. It's the first prime number. That's the reason why I have this error message, but now it will be fine.
Johan?
Yes?
How much time are you going to need for the conclusions?
Let's say 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. I check with the people if that is okay.
So the result of my of this tool is that I now have a PEM file, and the PEM file contains the private key of the public key from the web server. Now I can import this PEM file into my Wireshark. So let's try this. So right-click, protocol, RSA key list. Now I click on the plus sign, the IP address of my web server. And then the key file. And the key file is actually the file which I just recovered, which is here, the recover PEM file. And as you can see now, my data packages are decrypted, and means here that everything is now in clear text for my data packages. So here you can see the username, which is my name, and the password here in clear text. So this demonstrates that a private key can be recovered from a public key. Okay. to continue with the presentation, so how does this work in the wild, let's say? You need, of course, certificates before you can do something. The question is, how do you get all these certificates? Now, there is a project running, Project Sonar, which is from Rapid7, and they scan the internet for certificates. So they have a lot of files available, which you can download, and all these files, they contain certificates from all over the world. These certificates are not limited to website certificates, but also certificates for mail, IMAP, POP3, LDAP, and whatever. So what I've done here at home is I've set up a database, which is a Maria database. It's running on Windows, and I create a whole bunch of tools to import all these certificates into my database. The amount of certificates that I have so far is 271 million certificates. And why am I doing this? I'm trying to find the greatest common divisor of two public keys on the internet. So meaning, if I can find a greatest common divisor between two public keys on the internet, then the result of that calculation is one of the prime factors. Since I have the modulus and one of the prime factors, I can easily calculate the second prime number, and then I can recover the private key from a web server on the internet. This is a process that takes months before it goes to an end, but that's actually what I am doing these days. Okay, for the conclusion, remember, I start in the beginning with security is not a certificate only, meaning that you can buy a certificate, but if the certificate contains a vulnerable key, then it can easily be recovered into its private key. So the first conclusion is, if you have a vulnerable certificate and you store the private key into an hardware security module device, then it's useless because an attacker can easily calculate the private key from your weak public key. Do not use TLS 1.2 anymore, but use TLS 1.3 instead, because in the latest version of TLS, RSA is not supported anymore because of these reasons. Do not use the RSA algorithm for key exchange, but use ephemeral, Diffie-Hellman ephemeral, and elliptic curve. That's more secure than RSA. And if you cannot use any other cryptographic algorithms, but you have to use RSA, then you have to make sure that your prime numbers are large enough, because then factorization will not be possible, and that your primes are randomly enough and that they are not close to each other, because as I just demonstrated, when prime numbers are very close, they can easily be factorized. So I think I'm right on time for the conclusion. I hope it was clear enough for everybody, and that I can raise your attention that buying a certificate is not enough. You have to look deeper into how the keys are generated. Now, what I can say is that most of the certification authorities on the internet now, they have built an additional check. If you upload faulty key material, that it will not generate a certificate anymore. But this is just from the coming weeks. But there are still some certification authorities, like the one I used. They accept faulty key material, and you can create, or you can request or buy a faulty certificate. So I'm open to any questions that you have. I hope it was interesting.
I didn't see any questions on the chat until now, but I have a question already for you, Johan.
Yes.
Are you known with the TLS guidelines from, for example, the Dutch National Cybersecurity Center, the NCSSC? And because as far as I saw with your presentation, they come to the same conclusions and say that also that some of the keys and TLS encryptions and algorithms are not safe anymore. So let's put it to that question.
Yeah, so it's important that every organization, even small organizations, that they have a cryptographic policy where all the crypto suites are listed with the organization support. So that, for example, that older crypto algorithms like DES and triple DES and MD5 that they are not supported anymore, but that the organization will choose for more recent algorithms because these are more secure. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that the National Security Center from the Netherlands, that they will say it also, that you have to use more recent algorithms instead of the older ones.
And then, of course, there are some of these encryption check possibilities on internet, and they will give you the rating of encryption. As far as I know, they also take out the faulty algorithms and keys. Or do you think otherwise?
Yeah, it depends who creates the cryptographic key material. Certainly with servers, normally a best practice is that the private key will not that the private key always needs to be on the server where the cryptographic key material is generated, and it will not go to some other system. So yeah, so yeah.
Okay, you have to do it the right way.
Indeed.
Okay. Now I see a lot of thank yous in the chat. Food for thought here. Thanks. And a good update. Some have to leave already.
Yeah.
And now, but a lot of thanks from the public.
Yeah, thank you.
If there are no other questions, then I think we best can end the session here. I thank you all for listening in to this mathematical presentation, something completely different than other weeks. Thank you, and see you another time.
Okay, thank you. So